Oh, early 2000s anime, where you could get away with literally making heads roll. Cold open for this one featured the Ojamajo cheering on their school soccer team, except for Doremi, who would rather cheer for their coach who wasn't playing in the game, of course. Yeah, Momoko, if you want to know the finer details of the knows me senpai meme, well, there you go. The episode proper opened with that same soccer team, minus one coach for now, and plus one obnoxious Kotake. Yeah, they weren't being subtle at all about what the lesson of the day was going to be, but I still appreciate the little visual touches here, like Kotake's little smirk, and this bit of Kimura just kind of getting over his teammates' lack of unity. It's a little detail, but it does highlight how bad teammates could get away with a little bit of toxicity unless someone calls them out on it. The next day, Kotake talked with another one of their teammates named Koji Ito. Well, that's what happens when you let Tony Khan run your team. Yeah, I know he does American football, but come on, I'm not gonna miss out on a chance to do some pot shots on this idiot. But yeah, the two were clearly really into the sport, more so than even some of their teammates, and thus were the most excited to learn that a new coach was coming by, who turned out to be Igarashi, aka Doremi's episode 1 senpai, and one therefore you'd think she'd have given up on by now, since he is in a bit of a relationship with Maki, but whatever. Anyway, he was there because he couldn't play the sport himself with a broken arm, and thus had to do something with his time. And this team definitely needed the help as Kotake was already starting to spiral like most athletes really.
You're not wrong, Walter. You're just an asshole.
And yet, in another nice subtle bit, Kotake actually caught on to what he said, and Koji assured him that he didn't mind if he had a bit of an ego on him, as he did believe he was generally a better player, and yeah, he probably was, from a technical standpoint at least. It's good stuff, as while again, the lesson of the day is about as basic as it gets, they are at least writing some nuance to Kotake to make him not a completely irredeemable little a-hole. Anyway, after sneaking out on cleaning duty, the two participated in a practice session led by Igarashi that was nothing special and kind of routine all things considered, which yeah, I do kind of have to agree with Kotake that they could do a little more with a different coach. Sure, I get that the fundamentals are important, but who's to say you can't approach things in a different way, or hell, teach them something that they should be focusing on? Thank you, Mr. Motivational Poster. Still, this did at least play into things the next day when Kotake wanted Senpai to notice his soccer skills and maybe even get some personalized coaching. As a result, you can guess what happened. Like, come on, Kotake, there's no I in team, though there is one in faction, so you could interpret it as that. Anyway, Igarashi finally did something like an actual coach and mapped out their team.
Top, Kimura. Ito.
The rest of you made the team, except you, and you.
Of course, Kotake took this announcement about as well as you'd expect. Again, it really does help that we got that earlier bit where Kotake did show that he was capable of empathy and self-awareness, if only to balance out the fact that he was about to become a giant a-hole, especially to a good kid like Koji, to the point that he even gave him the cold shoulder in class. Hey, any reason to play one of the greatest OPs of all time? Of course, he shared his story with Doremi, who in turn shared it with the rest of her team, and as has been kind of the running theme with this show, they decided to make some treats to help patch things up with them. And just to make sure it worked out well, they decided to add a special ingredient. I wonder what it could be. Ooh, this black one looks especially tasty. Well, let's have a little taste. Why does it taste so fleshy? Nah, of course it wasn't a happiness spice that could be created from grounding a human or two, but rather lemons because, get it, life gives you lemons and all that jazz. Regardless, it didn't really quite work out, especially after Doremi just kind of blatantly told him that he should totes make up with Koji after eating their lemons. Yeah, y'all really didn't think this plan out all that much, did ya?
My plan is great.
Still a really nice and well-animated sunset at least. But yeah, this would pretty much be the conflict for the Ojamajo for the remainder of the episode, with them trying several different recipes to get Kotake to eventually accept their sweets, and inevitably kind of lose sight of what they were trying to do in the first place in getting him and Koji to make amends. Now, there's some pretty obvious issues with that, but we'll talk more about their contributions to this episode later. Anyway, Kotake continued to be that one member of the team who kept complaining to the coach about his choice of not including him as a regular. He got so toxic to the point that he challenged Igarashi to some one-on-one under the condition that if he won, he'd quit being their coach. And he lost to the guy who literally had one arm tied behind his back, or rather in the front, same difference. And even though it was a cheap sequence with no real animation, it was still pretty cool and did give us an idea of why Doremi would stand so much for the senpai. However, the real good stuff came after when Koji offered his hand to his friend in spite of how much of a jerk he had been. And yet... Like, damn, that's just such good drama for a sports anime. Eh? What do you mean this is a magical girl anime? Yeah, much like the last episode, this doesn't really feel like an episode of Ojamajo Doremi when ultimately the titular witches contribute so little to the point that they could easily be written out and it really wouldn't affect the story all that much. Now, of course, that alone doesn't necessarily make an episode bad. In fact, I'll say right now, I like this episode a hell of a lot more than Nishizawa's outing. But yeah, it is still a little irksome that the Magical Girls show doesn't really have all that much magic or girls. Just saying, it's kind of false advertising. Anyway, in order to really fix the relationship between Koji and Kotake, what they really needed wasn't some lemon treat, but rather a little more assertiveness from one of them. Yeah, in a really good moment, we got to see that both of these kids went through an arc as Koji finally stood up to Kotake, and while he could have easily called him out on his behavior, he instead complimented him and admitted that he was probably better suited as a regular. And yet, at the same time, he was glad that he was picked over him as it gave him the confidence to better himself rather than be a constant bench warmer. It was a feeling that Kotake remembered having in his early days too, and yet due to his own pride, he had lost sight of that humility that he once had. Of course, Igarashi realized this, and thus wanted him to start from zero and learn what it meant to be a part of a team again. With that, he finally apologized to Koji in a bit of a rush, but still really good scene. And I also appreciated that he stuck to his word and sat on the bench for half of the next game, but could still work to become a regular again, ending the episode on a very satisfying note. Though, and there's also some stuff with those other girls, but they weren't all that important, right? This was a really solid story and conflict for the boys. Yeah, don't get me wrong, I actually really like the story about one of the more significant side characters of the show getting one of the better spotlight episodes of the season. I just wish that the titular characters of the show could have done more magical stuff is all. While I certainly wouldn't call myself a fan of sports anime, I have seen a few and have enjoyed them well enough. And while this is a fairly typical story about teamwork and all that, it was still a solid story, if only based on its great execution with some great visual storytelling and little touches that really helped to sell the nuances about a toxic teammate's believable fall and the effect it could have on the rest of the team. Sure, at first they could just wave it off as no big deal, as he could get better later, but when the time inevitably comes and the team needs to figure out their position, then the real test of character can begin. And unfortunately for Kotake, he at least initially failed that test. In particular, he ended up really mistreating Koji, pretty much treating him like the Butters to his Cartman. And yet, because of some setup beforehand, we did want to see him get better, as we knew there was a good kid underneath all of that needless pride. Thus, once Koji stood up for himself, it not only felt like a good catharsis to see him growing a spine, but also some good stuff from Kotake finally coming around and becoming a good teammate. As a bonus, it was also cool to see Igarashi be something more than just eye candy for Doremi, and instead be a very solid mentor character who would have hinted at was just like Kotake at one time, hence likely why he was so strict with him. As a result, I really did enjoy this episode, more as a side story to the series called Ojamajo Doremi. Yeah, much like the previous episode, I do wish this one had a little more actual magic in it, but at least I like the characters in this one a lot more. And overall, this was just a really good sports episode about the boys that really didn't need the Ojamajo, which is a little odd to say in the Magical Girl anime, but hey, at least the animation here was leagues better than Season 2 Blue Lock. Thanks for watching, and hopefully you'll be able to check back on Halloween Day when we will try to do a special review. Granted, it's not going to be perfectly in the spirit of the holiday, but we usually do villain videos during this time of the year, so it's at least in keeping with the traditions of this channel. So do look forward to it, and until then though, for now my friends, and oh shoot, I'm missing the game. Ah yeah, look at those PNGs run across the field.